say that. But this is a good cause. You want to help some starving children? This is a good way to do it. So I ask you to prayerfully consider doing that. This is the last week for the special giving month. Feed my starving children. But that doesn't mean you have to stop giving. You can give all year long. All you have to do is label it for Feed My Starving Children, and we'll get it to them. One way or another. So please pray and consider. Thank you.
Stand and join us as we continue to worship God in song.
Well, the text for today will come from Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. Philippians was a church founded by the Apostle Paul on his second missionary journey, and it's really one of his great success stories. While many of Paul's letters are letters of correction for the churches that are stumbling, that are making mistakes, that are getting off track, the book of Philippians is a true book of joy and celebration, and how many blessings that the church brings to Paul and to the world. And so we read Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 18. Now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. As a result, it will become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. Because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. We'll stop there for just a couple minutes, and we'll pick up the rest of the verses in a bit. But if you were around when I was just starting ministry here, you may remember one of the first things I started doing was I would put my phone or my laptop, one or the other. Either initially I put it on this front pew, kind of next to where I sit, and I would live stream the service that way. And then when I realized people were hearing Riker playing with his toys a lot up front, I moved the laptop kind of over out of the corner. But that was really the very beginning of our online service. And I was really just kind of curious that if we put that out there, would anybody be interested in watching? You know, and mostly I wanted to use it for a tool for the weeks when people weren't able to be here, if they wanted to stay connected and things like that. And over time, as I watched for a few months, I noticed that there was a small but pretty consistent number of people who were tuning in and watching the service online. And to the extent that I went to the leadership and said, you know, there's a small community out here watching us online. It's probably worth the investment to spend $30, $40 on a little webcam to put up there and do the live stream a little bit better. And when I presented that to the leadership, they were receptive to that. They liked the idea, but they said, you know what, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's be a little more forward thinking. Let's really be prepared for what this could do, rather than, if it really takes off, having to get more stuff down the road. So rather than just getting a small webcam, they said, let's really look into it. Let's dive in. Let's get the equipment we truly need to do this right. And that started a learning process that in some ways is still ongoing as we learn some of the hiccups that come with technology. But I spent some time researching what would be a good camera to get for our needs, but not get too expensive. I had to learn how to stream it properly so that it could be viewed by the most people. And there was a learning curve, but over time we got where we had a pretty decent live stream service that we were able to offer. And then a while after that, of course, the coronavirus pandemic hit, and we were told we cannot gather in groups of more than 10, and it takes almost 10 people just to keep a normal service running, which basically meant we had to do service online. And that was a point where many churches were at a place where they were scrambling. They were trying to figure out, okay, how do we get the message out? What do we do since we cannot gather in person? But we were set. We were in the place we needed to be. We had everything in place to continue to get the message out in that difficult time. And we were in that place because God had placed in the leadership positions of the church the right people, the people who could say, you know, that's a nice idea, Matt, but let's do it right. And they were willing to realize that we needed to do things properly. God placed the right people in leadership at the right time because God knew what was coming. God knew what we would endure and knew what we would need for success. And we see Paul in a similar place as he is locked away in prison. He is in a difficult situation, and yet God is still working. The gospel of Jesus Christ is still being proclaimed, and it's being proclaimed in exciting ways, in ways that wouldn't happen normally, because Paul has been placed in the right place at the right time, even though it is difficult. Paul is chained up in prison at this point, yet he is still communicating to the church. He wants everyone to understand what is truly going on here, to let everyone know that those things that could have caused trouble, those things that truly could have ended his ministry, are actually the very things that are helping to make it grow in new and exciting ways. And it's all happening because he is in the right place at the right time, despite all the difficulties. These hardships that he's having to endure are growing the kingdom in ways that would otherwise not be possible. What could have been hardship, what could have broken Paul's spirit, what could have made him cry out, "Why, God, this isn't fair. After all I've done for you to try and spread the message, you're doing this to me." But instead of feeling sorry for himself, instead of questioning God, instead of giving up, Paul recognizes the glory of what God is doing despite the difficulty. And it gives us the chance to look at the challenges in our lives, to look at our difficulties and our hardships and change our perspective. To recognize, as Paul recognizes, that despite the hardships, despite the difficulties, that there are blessings even in the midst of those things, and that those hard times we experience can be used for God's greatness and God's glory. You know, Paul has that passion that we should hold within our heart to share the gospel no matter what challenges we face, to allow our hardship to serve as encouragement and inspiration for other people. But it requires us to be truly transparent and open, to not hide our struggles and our burdens, but rather to share them. What would our church look like? What would the world look like if, when we came here on Sunday morning and we looked around at other people and said, "Boy," instead of saying, "Boy, you know, look at how well this person is put together. Look at all the good things that are going and God is doing in their lives," even though we, in most cases, don't generally know what's truly going on in their life. What if instead of that, we could look at each other and say, "Wow, they are here. You know, they are really going through some struggles. They are having a hard time, but look at what God is doing in their life through these hard circumstances." What if we truly realize that it's not our worldly circumstances that matter? It only matters what we do with them and what we allow God to do through them. Paul's at a place in his ministry where he has been arrested for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, the Roman Empire is at a place where they are attempting to squash out that gospel. They see how it continues to grow and grow. So to silence Paul, they just throw him in prison. Now, he hasn't committed any crime. It's not even a politically motivated imprisonment, as so many were during that time. You know, they're not even trying to bring false or exaggerated charges the way they did against Jesus. They're simply locking him away down in a dungeon to try and silence him, to end his ministry. And the way the system worked, Paul was watched 24 hours a day. There were always guards right there present with them. And the way the rotation worked was every 4 hours there would be a different guard that would come in and watch them for 4 hours, and then after that they would go do other things, and a new guard would be ushered in. And I'm sure there were times where Paul and the other prisoners would see the guard coming and they would cringe, knowing that they were going to be in for an extremely difficult 4 hours, and there were probably other times where they knew that these guards would have a little more compassion upon them. But what Paul is able to recognize is that every 4 hours he has an entirely new audience. He has one person to sit and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ to, and to witness to them for 4 hours. And then in 4 hours, they're going to get a new opportunity to minister to the gospel new. And as a result, the word begins to spread because of Paul's situation. More and more people are hearing the gospel message, and more of these guards, as they hear this, as they see this, they realize this is no ordinary prisoner that is locked away. They realize what is going on with this man who has no charge brought against him. They hear how he stays positive and how he is encouraging others even while he is physically chained up and locked away. All of the palace guards begin to understand what is going on. Paul proclaimed that everyone is around is able to see and hear and understand that message that the emperor has tried to silence, and it is being proclaimed louder than ever before as these guards would eventually go out into the world and start sharing the message with their family, with their friends, with the people they would encounter outside the prison. And the message gets out from behind these cold stone walls in ways that would not be possible. All because Paul has been placed in the right place at the right time for the message to be spread. And Paul was willing to share the message despite the challenges. He was willing to continue to proclaim the very message that got him locked away in the first place. As he shared with everyone he encountered, even in prison, that Jesus Christ came into the world as the beloved Son of God. He lived, he died, and yet he rose again so that everyone could have salvation. Paul's arrest and imprisonment begin to have the very opposite effect of that which was intended. And Paul recognizes that this glory is only available because of his current situation. The guards are watching Paul. They see his struggles, but they see that this one true God he speaks of gives him the strength and the energy to see it through. And it gives these guards the strength to seek the one true God for themselves and to share that with the world. They all begin to realize what is true for each and every one of us, that our hardships and our difficulties so often make us stronger, and that God sees us through those hard times and works through those hard times. He gives us the strength to make it through, and we can come out stronger for it in the end. And then they are empowered to go out and to do the same. They receive a new boldness despite the persecution that they know they will face. And Nero, who was the emperor at that time, was a particularly harsh emperor who violently persecuted Christians. He did whatever he could to end the gospel. Now, there was a point when fire broke out in Rome, and nobody's ever been quite sure, but the belief is that he started that fire himself. But whatever the case, he was starting to take the blame for it as the leader of the day, but he turned that around. He said, no way, it was these Christian troublemakers who were starting this fire. And when the city burned and nearly every part of the city was affected by that fire, he was able to even more violently persecute these Christians and lock them away and execute many of them. But all of this persecution has empowered Paul. It has given him a boldness to remain faithful. It shows us that how we react reflects what we believe. We allow our hardships to destroy us. It shows what we believe about our God. But if we allow it to give us a boldness, to empower us, just as Paul allowed it to empower him, amazing things can happen. And so we continue to that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so in love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. Paul continues to recognize and say that, despite all these good, that yes, there are some hardships, there are some setbacks going on. Paul recognizes there are some that preach the gospel, but their motives are not pure. And these are people, many of which that are holding things against Paul. They've seen how much success he has in sharing that gospel message, how he has preached and said that Jesus Christ is available to everyone, whatever your culture, and they want to drag him down. They want to discredit him. They're enjoying kicking Paul while he is down. And he's at a place where he's locked away. He can do very little to defend himself. Paul's been a troublemaker for these people in the past, and now they are seeking to return the favor. These men have been willing to misuse the gospel for their own means. And a lot of these people were early church leaders who maybe started out with good intentions, but as they went, they twisted the message and they turned it for their own means, and they realized there was great profit and success for them personally. And then when Paul came on the scene, he set out to correct those people, and it knocked all these early church leaders down a bit. But now they see a chance to restore their standing. And rather than get upset, Paul realizes that there are many reasons for preaching the gospel. That there are many people out there, and not everyone's intentions may be entirely pure. But whatever the case, he says, it's not my place to judge their hearts. Some are out for their own personal gain. They recognize that there is fame and fortune to be made in proclaiming Jesus' name, whether they believe it or not. But there are others whose motives are pure, and it's not his place to criticize what is going on in the work of the kingdom. And I think it's easy for all of us to look at other churches and criticize and judge people for their motives. We can look at churches that have huge success, and these mega churches that have giant buildings and things like that. And it's easy to tear them down and say that they're only in it for the money. But we must recognize that we cannot know what is in a person's heart. Once in a while, I like to listen to a message from a few different of these big mega church pastors, and nobody's perfect or anything, but they generally have at least a good message. But I listened to one message that kind of a response to this particular pastor, and this guy was just tearing this big successful mega church pastor down, but the only thing he could really point to was the fact that his church was big and it was successful. And he just continued to rally on the fact that, well, if he's that successful, it must be because he's given in to the ways of the world. When it's truly not our place to decide. When we can acknowledge that, yes, there are some that have ulterior motives when they preach God's glory, and there are some whose motives are pure, but we can leave it up to God to discern what is in the person's heart. And we can instead recognize, as Paul does, that whatever the case, Jesus Christ is being preached, and that is a good thing. We can recognize that we are all here for a divine appointment, that God has placed each and every one of us where we are to do good right now, to serve God in all areas of our life. Even the present hardships that we face are going on for a reason. And Paul is saying this after he's been beaten, after he's been chased out of town after town, and he is thrown in prison. And if you look at it, Paul is truly awaiting execution in prison. But he assures us of these things as he is locked away. And he said, "It is good, because our God is good." He reminds us that when we serve others, we must serve out of love. And through that, we can come closer to understanding some of these hardships and struggles we face. We can recognize that we're not going to understand everything that goes on in the world, but we can trust that God will make it work for his glory. So let us go out and share that gospel message of love, out of love, true love for everyone that God puts in our life. Now, it's a message that sometimes can seem harsh to the ways of the world as we tell them that Jesus Christ is the only way you will be saved. It is a message that can seem harsh as we see people stumble and fail and say, Jesus Christ didn't die so you can continue to live in your sin. But it is truly a message that, even though it can be difficult, is a message of love.